Deezer is now cracking down on AI music as they're developing a tool to determine if a track is actually AI or made by a human. Now, this is a really interesting, quick article. You can see right here. First off, 10% of new tracks uploaded to Deezer are AI-generated music. The music service Deezer has spent the last year developing a tool to detect wholly AI-generated music uploaded to its service. Basically, they're saying right here that the company estimates that around 10%, like you saw in the title, of new tracks on its platform have been fully AI generated. That's around 10,000 tracks a day. And you can see here that most of the daily delivery of AI tracks are never streamed on Deezer, but they're, however, diluting the catalog and may be used for fraudulent activity. The company says that its tool can detect music created by models, including Suno and Udio, which are the two biggest ones. I've done a bunch of videos about them, but will also be able to expand to cover others as they emerge. And here's the interesting thing. What will Deezer do with this information? Tough to say, but as things stand, it will not be removing these tracks. It will not be removing them, but it will tag them as AI generated so that listeners know, and it will also remove them from its algorithmic recommendations. Pretty short article, but so much to unpack here, because I've done a lot of videos about AI music, both in terms of the technicalities of how to use Suno, Udio, how to release AI music and more. I've talked about my earnings, but also the concepts, the philosophical implications, if I call it like that, of AI music. And this is something that does not surprise me. I've done a lot of videos recently, especially about like, does Spotify allow AI music or not? And this kind of tricky cat and mouse game, or, I don't know what the right phrasing is or analogy is, where stores can't really say, yeah, you can release AI music, but stores also really can't say, no, you cannot, right? It is this tricky thing. And stores right now, and I've mentioned this a lot, have been talking about AI music. Even if they've not said it publicly, I know for almost, I bet $1 million that behind closed doors, Spotify is talking about this. Apple Music's talking about this. I just talked about how on DistroKid now, there's a new feature, and this is actually true for CD Baby, TuneCore, and other distribution services, that when you go to release music, Apple Music wants to know who's the producer, who is the instrumentation on it. Like, they want to know more information about how this track kind of got created. You could argue, do they want to add more credits? Which sometimes they do. They want to make sure that people are properly credited on a track. Or is this a way of them subtly combating AI music and deterring people? Now, granted, you can make something up. I put that Ash Ketchum from Pokemon was my producer. But even still, it's a step and a small sign that stores are really trying to crack down on this. And maybe some stores, maybe Spotify cares more or less than Apple Music, or in this case, Deezer. And first off, the fact that 10,000, what do they say right here? About 10,000 tracks a day, about fully AI generated, that's a lot, right? That is a lot of AI tracks being put on it. The fact that Deezer's now creating their own tool, and this does not surprise me. I'm not gonna lie, because I think it is a tricky landscape, as we're mentioning here, that let's say if you're a human and you're posting all these songs and you're working your butt off to produce and sing and get mixed and mastered, and you're putting in a bunch of money to be in a studio, however you make your music, they are right. Deezer is right that these AI-generated songs heavily dilute the market. And with it being so easy to make these AI-generated records, and with AI music being increasingly more popular, better, and easier to use, a lot of people are saying, you know what, I'm just gonna make a bunch of AI music and post it. And as Deezer, said in this article, that it's heavily diluting the other songs from other human-made musicians who genuinely care about the craft of making music. I think that this is something that, as Deezer's talking about it, that's actually a really good approach. I have to be honest, from my perspective, with everything I know about music distribution, streaming, all these kind of stuff that happens both in public but also behind the scenes or the back end, I think this is actually a genius idea for a couple of different reasons. One, having a tool to detect it, I think is a great idea, right? Now, there's a lot that goes into that. Definitely a subject for a whole other video. I can think of a few ways to go about it, but I think that's a great idea. Secondly, the fact that they're going to mark them as AI generated, I really like that. In case you didn't know, now on YouTube, for example, when I upload a video, I have to say to YouTube, yes or no, is there any AI generated content in this video in terms of me pretending like it's something else? Like, does this video show somebody surfing, but it's actually AI generated, for example. YouTube's kind of doing this now. And I think a lot of other platforms, both video and audio and maybe other forms of it, might say like, hey, we want to know if it's AI generated. And the fact that Deezer will mark a song or flag it as AI generated, I really like that. There are two different reasons. One, I think it's just important to know, right? I know some people might care or might not, but I think it's important to know. Another big thing, and I've talked about this in other videos, is a lot of people have said to me like, hey, Mark, I don't care if a song's AI generated or not. If it's good, it's good. And I kind of get that perspective. Like for me, I've made AI generated songs under my artist, The Infinite Lamb Chop. And sometimes I listen to those songs on my own. I pick those songs as opposed to a human made song because I feel like listening to those more, right? So for those people, they can still click the song whether they want to or not. They may say, hey, that's cool that it's flagged. That's cool that it says it's AI generated. I don't really care. I like the song and I want to listen to it. Thirdly, and this is something that I really like, that as I said, they're going to make sure, and I'm going to say this again, that they will remove them from the algorithmic recommendations. Basically what they're saying is when Deezer or any other service recommends songs, and there's a bunch of different ways they could go about this. Like, is it an auto-generated thing where when you're playing one song, which auto-play a bunch of other songs? There's a bunch of different ways I think they may go about this. But basically, they're not going to recommend AI songs based in terms of the algorithmic recommendations. I think this is actually the perfect middle ground. I think this is very well thought out, and I really like this because what this is allowing is it is allowing for people to still post AI music if they want on Deezer. Now, who knows if Deezer will actually take them down, but they're still allowing people to post AI music, one. Two, they're marking it. They're saying, hey, we want people to know you can still listen to it. You can still listen to it. We're not going to hold you back from listening to it, but we just want you to know this is actually AI generated. This is made by an AI music generator. And then in addition, lastly, they're saying, hey, we're going to allow it to still be on our platform. We're not going to, remove it. We're not going to ban the person. We're not going to not allow people to listen to these songs, but we're going to make sure that it doesn't get recommended. We would much rather recommend a human artist than an AI generated artist. Genius. I love this because I've mentioned before that, and some people argue with me about this, but I do stand by this, that if you look at algorithmic recommendations on Spotify, Deezer, all these other platforms, if they recommend an AI song over a human song, that is a direct stream that's being taken away from that human artist. Now, great, there's a lot of different ways people approach listening to music on streaming services. Definitely a whole other subject for a whole other video. Sometimes it's a direct link, like say from a friend. Sometimes it is algorithmic recommendations that you're listening to one song and it just starts auto-playing all these songs that you might like based off that initial song you started listening to. Sometimes you go to an artist directly and want to stream that artist, and then sometimes other artists get included, right? There's a lot of different ways. But one thing is this, when it comes to algorithmic recommendations, almost always, it's tough to say, if they play you an AI song, that is a direct stream, direct money, direct view, or play, direct number, analytically, in all these different ways, that's being taken away from a human artist. And the fact that they're saying, hey, if we can detect this AI, we're going to mark it and remove it from that, I think is great. Because the big issue right now, and I've mentioned this before, the big issue right now that I have with people releasing AI music, and like I said, I've done it under the Infinite Lamb Chop, right? Obviously, I'm very open about that Infinite Lamb Chop is, of course, AI generated. My issue is there are people who are not musicians who don't really care about music. They just want to make money. Not hating on the idea of making money, but what's tricky is they're making these AI songs using studio and audio just to make money on Spotify. And like I said, if someone makes that song that's AI generated and it gets recommended over a human made artist, let's say, because you're auto playing, for example, that is direct money being put in someone else's pocket that doesn't care all about music as opposed to a human artist. And you could argue, again, this is where things get maybe, more on the business side of things or capitalist structure, where you're saying, hey, that's part of capitalism, right? That, whether you care about music or not, if you're trying to make money, you're trying to make money. There are a lot of people you could argue who own, record companies or labels or studios who are like, hey, I don't care about music at all, but I found a way to make money where people come to my studio and spend money. I don't care about music, but I care about making money. So you could argue that's part of business. That's part of capitalism, right? A lot in that area, but I think this approach that Deezer's taking, I think is a great one. I think with all these things like I've already talked about throughout this video, I think it's a very smart approach to still allow people to release AI music while also still kind of cracking down on the openness of it, letting people know this AI music, and also still allowing human artists to not feel compromised by AI music or AI generated music being on these platforms. Now, granted, this is just Deezer. This is just one store of many, not the most popular one, right? I think Apple Music and Spotify being the most popular services. But this does make me think, this does make me wonder, could other stores follow suit? I feel like this is the first breadcrumb I've seen. I guess I may take that back. I think Apple Music was probably the first breadcrumb I saw of like, okay, it seems like, not openly, but subtly, this is Apple Music's way of starting to crack down a little bit. Not fully, but a little bit, right? You could argue maybe it's just for credits, right? But what Apple Music did, it's a subtle move towards kind of pushing back a little bit when it comes to AI music. But this one is a very out in the open, very vocal representation of saying, hey, we're actually going to do something about AI music. We're actually doing something. And I can see a lot of other streaming services following suit.